So hopefully this is what's brought us together today. Collections do bring people together. People love to look and share collections, look at collections, discuss collections, collectors like to discuss what has started their collections. So this quote that I'm about to bring up comes from the Museums Association. So where they've used the word museum, you can sort of substitute that for collection holder, because I know across the Sporting Heritage Network, not everybody is a museum or an archive. You're all different types and sizes of organisations. So if you want to have a quick read through this quote, I won't read it out. She says, there we are. So this quote comes from a report that the Museums Association did back in 2018 about how museums and how collection holders or organisations that hold collections can do so much more with them. It's very easy to just carry on doing what you're doing, but actually the key to collections is there's always a huge untapped potential. And a lot of that comes down to whether you've got capacity within your organisation or even funding or space to be able to do more with it. But the idea that there's always huge untapped potential, I think, is what's exciting about collections. So what would you like to do with your collections? I'm hoping lots of different things. So the key one that people always think about is they would like to display their collections. I know some of you already have existing displays and some of you are looking to create new displays. Either way, having a collection inventory can be really useful to that activity. All collections always require further research. It's one of those open-ended things that's never finished. But by knowing what you have in your collection, you'll be able to research your collection more effectively. I'm just going to pause 1 minute because I think I've got some people in my waiting room. Just double check there's nobody. Yes, I've got one person. Let me just admit them in. There we are. And you may want to share your collection, whether that's sharing it with internally with other people within your organisation, or whether it's externally as part of a display or as part of a bit of promotion. Sharing your collection is to provide a lot of sort of joy and provide essential exposure for the items that we look after. You may want to develop your collection. Collections are an organic thing, aren't they? You always want to sort of add more to them, maybe shape them differently. You may want to know where your gaps are. Again, a collection inventory can really help you with that. Particularly if you're looking to develop your collections, you may want to improve the way that you're looking after your collections. And again, by creating an inventory, we'll talk about how you might want to reflect on how you're managing your collection at a very simple level. None of this is hopefully going to be too onerous, and you can scale it. All the advice that comes out of this presentation, you'll be able to scale to within the capacity of your setup. Promotion. Again, this may be something that you want to do within your organisation internally. It may be that they've had a collection for a while and it's not been used and it's not necessarily being valued. Creating a collection inventory is a great way to be able to say, look at this fantastic resource we have. There are so many things we can do with it. But you might want to do it externally, and we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. You may want to attract funds. Obviously, a lot of the funding at the moment is focused on the COVID pandemic, but once the funders open up their general project and grant funds again, being in a better situation about knowing what's in your collection, you will be able to access funds far more easily. And then the last one is create partnerships. So obviously you're already within a subject specialist network within the Sporting Heritage Network. So there may be people within this network that you may want to partner with. I know that there's already a few partnerships happening within this network on the cricket side with the Yorkshire Cricket Foundation working with clubs in the Leeds and Bradford area. But it may be that you want to create partnerships with other types of organisations as well. So that's a sort of an introduction to some of the things that I hope that you may be looking to do with your collection. I wouldn't in any way suggest that you embark on all at the same time, because I think it would be unachievable, but there may be a few things there that sort of spark your interest. So the key to starting any of these projects is knowing what you have in your collection. So the meat of this presentation is going to be looking at what makes up a collection inventory. So what is an inventory? It's a detailed list of everything you hold, but it is not a catalogue. So this is where we sort of get into collection management semantics. An inventory is a finite listing of your collection. A catalogue, a good way to look at a catalogue is that it's an open-ended record. It's all the things you could possibly ever know about each item in your collection. It's the sort of thing that you would add to all the time when somebody else comes forward and go, oh, I've got a bit of extra information about that hockey stick or football or that piece of sporting memorabilia. It's that open-ended record where you just add to all the time. An inventory is very much, once you've done it, is a closed piece of work. And that's why we would recommend, if you're starting from scratch particularly, or you've got a backlog, or you've just had a big donation of material, that an inventory is quite a manageable way to start looking at your collection. So why create one? Apart from the fact that it's quick and, well, quick within in inverted commas, it allows you to be accountable. So whether you want to prove to your internal organisation that your collection is of value, the number of items you've got in your collection, the breadth of topics that it covers, the breadth of the time frame, it allows you to have that accountability. Also, for people who are donating to your collection, they like to be able to see that you have your collection beautifully listed. It shows that you're valuing it. It shows that you're investing time in it. And it gives them confidence when they are offering items to your collection. As I say, in comparison to creating a catalogue record, because an inventory has a finite amount of information, it is, in comparison, quick, and I say quick in inverted commas, achievable task. A lot of documentation of collections is very open-ended and can be sort of seen as a bit of a life's work, but this is definitely a much more manageable way to start. And as we touched on in the previous slide, knowing what you have in your collection can be a springboard onto a whole range of other projects that can move either the collection or your organisation or how you're perceived forward. So what to include? There is a minimum level of information to include in an inventory. It starts with 11 fields, and then you can add more if it's appropriate for your organisation. There is a copy of this spreadsheet up on the Sporting Heritage website, and the link is on the bottom of the slide. I've updated it for this presentation, so I will send the updated version round when we've done the slide deck, and I'll make sure that the updated version is on the website. I just need to check with Justine that it's up there. So the 11 fields are as follows: a unique object number, a simple name, the number of objects in that record, a brief description, an image or a link to where your image is held, the current location and the date it was checked, who owns your collection items, how it came into your collection, and then the recorder. So that's the person who created that inventory record and the date that they created it. You can add in other fields, but just be aware that obviously the more fields you add in, the more time it will take you to complete each record. So you've just got to think about how that might impact on capacity. So far so good, relatively straightforward. I hope it's seeming, a manageable task to do. But what I would say is if you are going to embark on this, it's worth just having a few moments just to think about how you're going to do this. I'm sure everybody's had at one stage in their life where they've embarked on a project either out of sheer enthusiasm and just wanting to crack on with it, and then you get sort of halfway through and you realise you're a bit like this chap in the picture. You sort of painted yourself into the corner and thought, oh, well, I wish I'd actually thought some of that through at the beginning. Alternatively, you rush in thinking it's going to be relatively straightforward and realise that there's a few complications. It's worth just pausing before you start just to think through some of the issues that might come up. Who will you work with? Now, this is one of those tasks that you can do on your own, but unless you are the person who knows about your collection, and every organisation has a person that seems to know, you know, a huge amount about the history, or a huge amount about how the rules and the structure have created, or about the creation of kit. It's quite often good to work in partnership with somebody else, and at least you can bat ideas backwards and forwards. Who will you share your progress with? If you're creating an inventory from scratch, it's quite a good bit of promotion to say that you're actually upgrading the way that you're looking after your collection. So you could use this as a bit of a tool, a bit of an advocacy tool within your organisation, because you're actually improving what is going on. Whose knowledge might you need to draw on? So this is where we come back to this idea that there's always 2 or 3 people within an organisation who hold a huge amount of knowledge, either about that sport, about the history, how it links with other social things. So you may want to just have a chat with them beforehand, let them know that you're doing this project, and find out how they would like to be involved. I can see that we've got a few things in the chat room, so I shall pause after this slide to have a look at the chat and see if there's some questions that we can pick up on. And then something that I will come back to again and again: record the decisions you make. You may be doing the inventory record now, but it may be that somebody else takes over in the future. It may be that you can do a handover with them and you can explain how you set this up. But there is a certain amount of flexibility on how you do this, and actually picking it up cold, if you're that second person coming in, it takes quite a while to unpick somebody else's thought processes. So it's always good just to keep, doesn't need to be onerous, just a 1-page sheet of notes about how you've made some of the decisions of how you've recorded your collection. So we'll pick up on that as we go through. Also, if you're starting from scratch, it's good to work out how long this is going to take. And the best way to do that is to work out how many boxes, or if you can quantify your collection and then do a sample, and then you can work out how long that takes and then extrapolate it across the rest of your collections. Right, I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat because it looked like there were quite a few things in there. Let's have a look. See if there's some, excuse me, see if there are some questions that we can pick up on now. Oh, it won't let me bring the chat up. Just bear with me one moment, sorry. I'm just going to stop screen sharing just one moment so we can just have a look at the chat.
Fran?
Yes.
It's all right. It's sorted. There were quite a few messages from me to you, but it's all sorted.
Okay, lovely. Righty-ho, we shall resume.
Okay.
Right, so moving on. So what we're going to do now is work through each of those 11 fields within the inventory spreadsheet, just giving a few hints and tips about how you can best go about filling them in. So the first one is numbers and numbering. Every item in your collection ideally needs its own unique number, and to a certain extent it doesn't matter what that number is, as long as it's unique and you can identify that item by its number and differentiate it from another piece within your collection. I would suggest to keep it simple and be consistent. It's very, very tempting to create complicated numbering systems. It doesn't gain you anything particular. I would keep it simple. How you number your collection depends on your starting point. And I know that there's a whole range of people on the presentation today who are from a whole range of organisations, and your collection cataloguing and collection inventory processes have been different. So I'm just going to go through 3 of the main collection starting points. So you may be in an established museum where the collection's already been numbered and each item has been marked with its unique number. You may have then suddenly had a big donation of items that come in, and you want to, rather than going straight into cataloguing them, because you know it's a large donation, it's going to take a lot of time, you may decide you want to create an inventory so you can see what's come in. What I would suggest is to continue the existing system. It's very tempting to think, oh, this is a separate piece of work. I'll start a new numbering system so that it's clear that it's not part of the main body of the museum. What will happen is when people come back and look at that in the future, they won't understand that necessarily. It won't necessarily be obvious, and they might think it's a separate collection, or there's a reason why that new donation hasn't gone into your main body of work. And unless you've recorded your decisions, it won't be clear. So I would say don't start a new system. Use the existing systems that's there. It's all too easy to create confusing numbering systems. The number of museums that I've worked for where they've had conflicting numbering systems, and it takes a very long time to unpick it. So yeah, keep it simple, use what's there already. The second scenario would be that you've had your collection numbered before, but the individual items haven't been marked with that number. So there's been a break in the link between your numbering system and your collection. So if you think that that's been the case with your collection, what I would suggest is you use a system of temporary numbers. And the simplest way to do that is to start T for temporary and then just use a running list of numbers as you go through. And then as you find where they've been listed previously, you can do a reconciling project. And I'm doing this with one of my clients at the moment. When we first started working with them, it appeared that they had a huge amount of unlisted material. And then we discovered a collection database that had a huge number of entries on, but no locations. And because there weren't any locations and the items aren't numbered, you can't reconcile it. So we've set up a huge temporary listing, and we're now going back and matching everything up. And as you match things up, you get rid of the temporary number and you mark, and we'll go on to talk about this a little bit more in a moment, you mark its main museum number or collection number on it. And then I know that some of you are starting from scratch. So if your collection has not been numbered before, then you're almost in an ideal situation because you can create your own unique numbering system. Best practice would say that you create a prefix and then a running number. So you can keep it simple and use initials. I think we were going to have, and I'm not sure she's joined, Joanna, who's from Tottenham Hotspur. So I think I was inspired by Tottenham Hotspur, so that's the TH. So choose a prefix that reflects your organisation and then a running number. There does tend to be a preference within the museum world, so it's up to you whether you want to pick up on that to use the year that you're actually creating the inventory. It doesn't have to be the year that the item was donated to you, but the year that you're actually in at the moment, and then a running number. And then when you get to the end of this year, you would start with 2021.1 and then have a running number. And then anybody looking back will know when those records have been created. So it's quite a simple system. And once you've set it up, it's quite simple to maintain. And it's decisions like this that I would suggest you keep a record of why you've chosen which way you're going to do it, so that whoever might come and pick up the system after you knows where to start from. So they're the three approaches to numbering. Taking a little detour off the spreadsheet, it's not that there's no point in numbering your collection if you don't mark your items, but it would cause huge problems. So we would always recommend that as you are numbering your collection, you would mark it at the same time. So it's quite straightforward to mark your collection. And if you're looking for guidance, the Collections Trust has a huge amount of information on their website, and they have a very comprehensive booklet about labelling and marking items. So that is the link to it. I'll also put that on the resources sheet. But the main thing to bear in mind when you're marking your collection is it needs to be reversible. However you mark it, it needs to be reversible, and it needs to maintain the integrity of the item, which I think is a really nice sort of concept. You need to be able to mark it in such a way that it doesn't damage the item, you're not taking anything away from it, you're not putting your number right in the middle at the front, so you're taking away from any aesthetic or how it might be used. So you're thinking about the item in a most sort of sympathetic way. And bearing that in mind, these are the key things not to use when marking your collection, mainly because they are not reversible. They leave a residue, some of those things, or they're not conservation grade, or over time, particularly things like paper clips and staples rust. They've got chemicals in them that might adversely affect your collections. So please don't use any of those. If you've got those in your collections already, as many collections do, as you go through it, you now know to remove them and swap it out for something that's a bit more sympathetic. So at a glance with labelling and marking, the quickest and easiest ways of doing them are, if you've got an archive collection, to use a 2B pencil, so softer than your standard HB, and when you sharpen it, just give it a little scribble on the paper to get rid of that very sharp sharpened tip so that it doesn't scratch onto your items. And then just be consistent where you mark your number. So once you've created your number and put your record in your inventory spreadsheet, find your archive piece of material, and either, quite often the most common place is in one of the top or bottom corners on the back, so that if you were to ever display that item or photograph it, the number wouldn't be obvious. But be consistent so that anybody looking at your collection knows where to look on all your items, because they don't want to be turning items around looking for your number. If you use the same sort of positioning more or less throughout your collections, that's always to be recommended. For items that you can't write onto, tie-on paper tags are incredibly useful, and you can write on the tags in pen and then just attach the tags so they don't damage the item. For textiles, if you've got anything from banners to sporting kits, anything like that, flags, you can actually sew a label on, or you can again use tie-on paper tags as easiest. I've put some links to some of the sew-on options in the resource sheet that I'll send out after the session. Now everybody has awkward items in their collections, items that you can't tie anything onto, can't write onto. If they're small, like things that are particularly difficult, or things that are spherical, or things that have very smooth sides. If they're small, you can put them in grip seal bags that you can buy very readily because they're inert. Quite often the grip seal bags that have the white strips across them, a bit like your freezer bags that you can write what you put in your freezer, you can write on those. They're particularly useful. You can get them in all sorts of sizes. If you can't get your item into a grip seal bag, then you can use an unbleached cotton tape and almost tie it up like you would presents. So tie it up so you've got to create a cross shape, and then you can either write on the tape or you can attach a paper tag to it. I would always recommend trying to attach the number in some way to your collection item, because again, once you've done this task, you might not come back to the collection item, or it might not even be you who comes back to the collection item for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and the last thing you want to do is lift it up going, I know I gave this a number, but I cannot find it for the life of me. So it saves you having to go back through. So moving on to section 2, simple name. So this is a bit like a category name. It's not as full as your description, which will be the next one we come on to. So it just needs to be a simple word or two. So I put in some examples there that might be suitable for the sort of collections that you're looking after. One thing that I would say it's worth thinking about, particularly where you've got items that might be framed, it's worth including whether they're framed or not. That's particularly for photographs and certificates, because if you're looking for something that you think is loose, it might be stored in a different place from where it's framed. Again, with newspapers and magazines, it's worth being accurate as to whether it's the whole newspaper or the whole magazine or journal, or whether it's just a cutting or an article. So just a few things to bear in mind. There are a few decisions you will need to make as you go through the simple name process. And again, this is where it's quite useful to chat with somebody else within your organisation about this, and to record the terms that you choose, so that you'll do a lot of recording as you start, but then as you come back to it, you can just use that as a reference, so you make sure that you're consistent as you go through. So the decisions that you might want to look at, everybody calls these things different. It doesn't matter what you call them as long as you are consistent. I will be like a broken record by the end of this presentation. Record your decisions and be consistent. Biggest advice I could give you. So if you have a single sheet piece of paper that is promotional, do you call it a flyer, a pamphlet, or something else? You just need to make that decision so that you are consistent. And again, if you've got a multiple page document that's been stapled or stitched together, is it a brochure, is it a program, is it a booklet? And when does a booklet become a book? So if you've got a lot of these sorts of items in your collection, it's worth just thinking about how you might choose the right words, because you don't want to get to the end and realise that you've used 6 different words for what is essentially the same type of item. Moving on to number 3, so quite straightforward, number of objects. So ideally, wherever possible, list items individually, but at inventory level, you can list things in bulk. So this is particularly helpful if you get a large donation of personal papers. Quite often this happens, you know, when somebody's passed away and somebody's been clearing a loft, and they bring you in a suitcase and they say, here is every letter he wrote about the Hockey Association for the last 30 years. You think, gosh, okay, that's going to take quite a lot of work to look through all of that. You can, at inventory level, list them as a bulk donation. At catalogue level, you probably want to list them individually, but that's a much bigger job. And that's why I say that the inventory process is much quicker to achieve than going straight in and creating a catalogue, which is a much fuller and much more time consuming activity. So bulk listing is also particularly useful if you get, again, a large collection of photographs, or if you get a collection of photograph albums. And again, this is one of the decisions you may need to make further down the line, whether you class an album as one item, or whether you go through and catalogue each of the photographs separately, depending on the range of things that are shown in each of the photographs. But you may have photograph albums that have got upwards of 100 photographs in, and again, when you suddenly get them presented to you, that's quite a big job. You may want to just put them into your inventory as per album and come back to those later when you've got the time and capacity to do it. Just in case any of you've got natural history or archaeological finds, quite often use bulk listing if you get bags of finds. So you get bags of shells or eggs or feathers from natural history collections, going back to that first slide that I used, drawers and drawers of things. And archaeologists do like to pick up things when they do their field walking. So the number of museum collections I've worked with, where they've got bags and bags and bags of flint and chalk that all need going through by a finds expert. There's no way that you would necessarily want to list all those individually. So here is your opportunity to list them as a bulk entry. So that's where you may just need to count them. So you can, rather than putting in one in your number of objects, you just put in the number that are in your bag or in your album. Ideally, only bulk listings that are similar though. It's quite frustrating when you come across a listing that says collection of personal papers, photographs, medals and uniform, and then they've just put the number of items that, you know, 33 items, and you can't tell from that. It might be 2 letters and the rest are the interesting, great things you might want to include in a display or in an article that you want to write about that particular subject. So if you've got separate items, it's much more useful in the long term to split them out. Number 4, brief description. So here is where you can go to town and really include all the information about the item that you know. You probably only need about 2 to 3 sentences, but you need to create an accurate picture of the item, because once you've listed it in your inventory, there's every chance that it will go into store and not be seen for a while. So your inventory may be your reference point for the collection. So you want to create an accurate picture of the item, and you want to be able to distinguish it from another item that's quite similar. This is particularly pertinent if you're dealing with things that are very similar. So for example, if you had a sporting team who all played in a cup final and each one of them donated their shirts. So in theory, shirts are all very, very similar. You would want to distinguish them and match them up to each player. Work out what is different about that item that makes it valuable, how you could distinguish it from another collection. I used to work with army museums a lot, and they have a huge amount of standard issue kit. And they were always quite keen to get rid of duplicates within their collections. But actually, if you could have 10 leather belts that are all the same, but if one of those leather belts was worn by somebody who was involved in a very important battle or was awarded a particular important medal, that's why you would want to keep that one in your collection. And if you don't record that in your collection information, it's very easy for that sort of information to get lost. Joe, how are we doing on questions? Do I need to pause? No, we're good to go. Jolly good. So this is where some of those first sections that we talked about are going to be quite quick and easy once you get into the swing of it to complete. The brief description is worth spending a bit more time just thinking about the quality of the description you're going to put in there, because the information you put in will determine how well you can use the item in the future. Here are some genuine poor descriptions that I've come across, probably mostly in the last year. Wartime photo, absolutely no use at all. Photo in Egypt. doesn't tell you what's going on. I have a lot of photographs of this gentleman in Eastbourne. I don't know what he's doing, but he's in Eastbourne. I've got about 24 of them at the moment, but now I need to go back, open up the box and work out what it is that he's been doing on his time in Eastbourne. Correspondence to Jane Smith, letter, postcard, enormous poster, difficult to know who's it from, what are they talking about, not very useful. Box, oh my goodness, box drives me mad. Matchbox, cigarette box, packing crate, just some descriptions can be, it's almost better to have no description than a description like that. And I think the last one on there, unidentified object, again, not terribly helpful. It would be better to pause and speak to somebody else within your organisation to see if they can at least give you a outline identification, because actually all you're saying is, I didn't invest the time in that, and you're passing that problem on to whoever comes next, and you're stopping that collection item from being used in the future, because unless you've got the time, somebody else will just jump over it, and that collection issue will never be solved. So please think carefully about how you do your brief description. So I'm just going to go through a few examples. So for documents, an example of how you might catalogue or write a brief description for a document item: A4 certificate awarded by the Umpires Association to David Jones for the completion of the advanced umpiring course on the 23rd of June 1978. Straightforward sentence, you should be able to get that just by looking at the item. The certificate has a coloured decorative scroll border and a gold foil stamp in the bottom right hand corner, no markings on the reverse. So from that, you'll be able to hopefully tell if you're looking to put a display together, or you want something that looks attractive for a report, more or less what that item looks like. With archive collections, it's always worth noting whether there's something on the back, because sometimes the key to what's on the front has been written in pencil by somebody on the back further down the line. So here's another example: single sheet letter written by Sarah Tilley, club secretary at Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club, to David Jones, dated 14th of April 1980, confirming his selection to the first team for the 1980 season. This letter is typed on foolscap official club letterhead. So 2 sentences in both those descriptions, which hopefully would give you enough information to decide if you want to use those items in one of your other activities further going forwards. Looking at photographs, here are a few examples. Black and white photograph of 4 male hockey players wearing white shirts and shorts. All are carrying hockey sticks as they walk out onto the pitch at the Lions Den Club in Woking for a practice session. On the reverse, pencil writing identifies David Jones as 3rd from the left, dated 1991, 10 by 8 inches. Now, you might not have all that information about your collection items, so don't worry, you don't have to be the expert in your collection, but I hope you can just see sort of the premise of the way that we're sort of working here. It may be that you need to speak to somebody else to fill in some of those gaps, but if you get some of that information in, it's so much more useful. So then, second example, small colour photograph of the captain of the Sussex County cricket team, first 11, being awarded the trophy for the league championship by the league president in front of the match crowd. Date unknown. You don't have to know everything. You can always admit where you don't know what things are. Kit suggests 1970s, nothing written on the back. So again, just 2 sentences. Books, quite straightforward. So title, author, ISBN is always useful, because quite often you get books written with very, very similar titles, whether it's got a dust cover or not, and the number of pages. These are 2 books that I'm reading at the moment for a cricket project that I'm working on. So genuine examples. And then finally.
And can I just interrupt?
Yes,
and
of course.
Just say, sorry, rather than send a private chat, there's some comments. So I know David's done a good comment about how he's recorded collections and what he's done up on the chat. So what I might do, if you're okay with it for the rest of it, is I'll wave my hand when there's some good stuff, and then just mention it to everybody.
Yes, that'd be brilliant. Yes, thanks, Joe. That'd be really helpful.
David's just put about recording collections as a single object and then later expanding it into individual objects, e.g. a bound book of programmes for a season, and then expanding it with details for individual programmes.
Yes, so, that's the benefit of using this inventory system, that you can put that in as a bulk entry, and then yes, when you've got the time and the capacity, or the people who've got the knowledge, you can go back and list them individually. Yeah, so that's a very good example. So, oh, this one's for you, Paul, actually, because I've used Menston, because this is a photograph of something that you sent me for the project. So artifact collections, again, it's just getting that top level of detail. So Menston Cricket Club players, dark blue woolen peaked cap embroidered with the letters MCC in white on the front. I could tell that more or less. Hopefully that's a relatively accurate description from the photo that Paul sent me. And then slightly artistic license, I've put label inside, has the maker's name, Leeds Textiles printed and handwritten, the name of the player, David Jones, approximate date 1975, 1983. You may know that from when that person was active. You may not have all this information about your collection, but it just shows you the sort of information it would be good to capture. And if you're not capturing this information, or you feel that some of this information is being lost, it may be that when people donate or give or loan your items to you, it may be something you want to consider asking them at that point. And then I think there's another example here. So silver hinge cigarette case with tennis match scene engraved on the front. Style suggests 1920 to 1930. Case has a number of small dents, not hallmarked, possibly plate. So that's something that further down the line you can go back and check, or you can send off to somebody, to a silver specialist, and they may be able to say, oh yes, items of this period, invariably plate, I'll come and have a look at it. So moving on to images. So alongside your brief description, having a good quality, clear image of your collection items, they're two so valuable things that work together. Ideally, when you photograph the items for your collection, please rename the files and match, when you rename the image file, match up the numbers. So use the number that you've created on your inventory record, and quite often it's quite useful just to have a quick 2-3 word example, description of what the item is. Now, the Sporting Heritage inventory is on an Excel spreadsheet. If you've got a large collection, inserting images into an Excel spreadsheet will make it quite unwieldy. So you may want to just make a note as to where it is stored. But if you are storing photographs that are on your personal computer, think about where you're going to back them up to, because the heartbreaking thing is when computers fail or technology crashes and you lose all that work. So you may want to think about cloud storage, or storage where other people can access it, or back it up on a memory stick. Just make sure that the time you're investing in this won't get sort of scuppered by a technological fail. For archive collections, wherever you can, scan the item rather than photograph it. I know it's not always possible for everybody, but if you are in a position to be able to scan your collections, what we would recommend from a conservation point of view is that you would do it just once, but you would scan at the highest resolution you can and save it as a TIFF file, which is the most information full digital file you can create from scanning. Then resave the item as a large JPEG file, which will be easier to work with. And then for the purposes of your spreadsheet, you can then resave it again as a small sort of working file. If anybody wants any help on that sort of information, because I don't have time to go into it in huge detail in this presentation, I'm more than happy to have a chat afterwards, or after the session is finished. So you don't need to buy expensive equipment, just follow these quick tips. So make sure you're well lit, plain background. When I say size guide, you could just use a ruler. There are all sorts of size guides you can buy, and if you ever look at, fancy collections online like the British Museum or any of the big ones, they quite often have colour and scale guides in them. You don't need to go to that extent unless you've got something easily to hand, a ruler that is easy to see, so that when you go back and look at your collection item, you get an idea of the scale. If you're photographing two-dimensional material that you can't scan, so either something that's bigger than your flatbed scanner or you're not in a position to scan, try and get it as square on as possible. So that you're accurately reflecting the item. And try and photograph everything of interest. I know this sometimes means you end up with 3 or 4 photographs per item, but it will just save you time in the long run. If it's got interesting maker's marks that you think you might want to research later, if you've got paper documents that have got things written on the back, it's always good to take a photograph of those as well. These are the things it's worth investing the time in now, rather than having to come back and do it later. and I can't see my last thing on that slide. I've got all my photographs there. Oh yes, so on the resource list, I've put some links to some guides about digitisation and a short film about photographing collections. Now these have been aimed at museums, so please don't be overwhelmed by the huge amount of technical information that's in there. Scale it to whatever is appropriate to your organisation, but if you can end up with a good, clear photograph, then that's all you need. So the benefits of it, if you can have a good, clear photograph, then you won't need to keep getting your collection items out of the box, so you'll be minimising the wear and tear, ensuring that your collection will last longer. So it's just a basic conservation principle. You can then use it in lots of different ways without having to get your collection out again. And you can also then send your images on to other people. So it may be that you want to look to get your collection valued. You suddenly realise that actually your collection is more considerable than you thought it was. It's not included on your club or your organisation's insurance listing. You may want to send it off and so that they can put a value against it. You may want to get things identified. So a good clear set of photographs you can send off to a specialist, or you can use them to answer inquiries, or you can encourage people to start inquiring about your collections, and you can use your photographs in your responses. So you've numbered your items, you've described them, you've got a good image of them. Now the next key piece of information to record is where they're stored. I've been having this problem with one of the collections that I'm working with, that they've got a reasonable collection listing but no locations on things. So it's incredible. You can't audit the collection, you can't check that you have everything that you say you have if you do not know where it's stored. So you may need to, if you've not got location information on any of your collection listings, you may need to set up a system. So best practice would ask you to record the building, the room, the shelf, and then the box or the folder or whatever you're storing those items in. So as an example, it might be clubhouse, iOffice, shelf 4, box 1. So you may need to start numbering rooms or numbering shelves or numbering boxes. So these are some of those things you need to think about in advance, and just setting up a system that allows you to accurately number things. It may be that your collection is split across several locations. I know a number of collections that are split across buildings, all with different ownership. So it's key to sort of have that building section in if it's appropriate for your organisation. And then the date that you last saw it there. So it's essentially doing a quick audit as you're creating this inventory record. And then you won't be chasing around looking for it if you think it's in one location, if it's somewhere else. Then if you get truly carried away with a love of documentation, which on occasion I have, you can then create, from once your inventory is complete, you can then create lists for each of your boxes and folders and include them in the front so that you can look at a glance as to what's in that folder or box. And then again, that makes it much easier if you're looking for material or you're trying to answer inquiries. Ownership. Now this can be quite a thorny issue. Collections can belong to all sorts of different people. It's all too easy to assume that when people give, in inverted commas, items to your collection, that it is a donation. But at some point you need to get this clarified, and I'm sure those of you who already work in established museums, you may use the Collections Trust stationery, which has specific fields about handing over the legal title of items into your collection. So you just need to be clear who owns it in case somebody comes and claims it back further down the line. Or classic example is that you have a beautiful oil painting within your collection, you spend money restoring it, and then it comes to light that you don't own it and you've invested your money in, but you've actually got to return it to the owner, so it's money not well spent. So if you're not recording that information at the moment, that is one of the key pieces that I would say when people pass the collection material to you, that you record who owns it. So, and that's can go in your inventory level, and that information then gets transferred into the main catalogue. If you go down that route, or if you just stick it in inventory, then you've got that information there and it's clear. So be clear on the grounds that this item is coming into your collection. Gift seems to be, it's strange with lots of collection management software, rather than using donation, they use gift, but you can choose the term you use as long as you're consistent. The other alternative obviously is loan. Sometimes things come in for identification and then never get returned to their owners. That happens quite a lot. And sometimes you just don't know. So if you've got lots of items that are listed either as unknown, or the other classic is found in store, You just need to be open to the fact that somebody further down the line might come back and say, oh, well, my father, you know, loaned this material to you, but actually as a family, we would like it back. So it may be that you have a number of items that are like that. And then the last two fields are nice and quick. So it's your initials when you create the inventory record and the date that you did it. So nice and simple. So they are the 11 fields. That's been quite a quick whip through. So we'll just go back to our planning diagram that we started with at the beginning and just talk through how now you have your beautifully complete inventory of your collection, how that might help you. So if you're thinking about displaying your collection, you may have found while writing your inventory that you can see the themes that go through your collection. You may be able to suddenly chart the development of kit and equipment through your collection, or you may have particular events that you've got, or particular important matches that you've got a lot of material of, and you suddenly think, well, actually that would lend itself to a really nice display. You can then think about how you might put that together, go for funding, contact a local venue, or in these COVID times, think about doing it digitally on your website. But without having the inventory, it's difficult to actually map how the themes and trends within your collection are developing. Oh, Jo, what would you like to say? Oh, you're on mute. Lovely.
There we go. Just another couple of points from Davey, really. So the one which I think is really useful is if you are going to log location, make sure you tell people where it is in case they move it. And he said that they use a standard paper object entry form to record new items.
Yes, I'm going to include a link to the Collections Trust. So yes, thank you for raising that, David. Actually, I'll include a link to the Collections Trust stationery form, which lots of sort of standard across museums. So you can see it there. Stationery does tend to be quite expensive, so it depends whether it's, you know, affordable within your organisation's budget, but you'll be able to see the key information that they would recommend that you record as people give things into your collection.
And the final one, which was one when you were looking at photographing objects and actually sizing them, is you said whatever you're using to measure your objects, make sure you use the same units consistently.
Yes. I'm in the middle of converting inches to centimetres, and actually I did put on that description a 10 by 8 because photographs tend to come in imperial and they don't make so much sense in metric. But yes, whichever one you go for, be consistent. Or if you have the 10 by 8, have the metric. It would have been a better example that I prepared for you if I put the metric equivalent, so that when you come to try and work out your displays or work out how you're going to store items, you know sort of the sizes that you're looking at. It's very easy. It's like those classic when you buy things online and you think you've bought 4 carrots and actually you've bought, you know, 100 weight of them, and it suddenly arrives and you don't know quite how you're going to get through all that carrot soup. So just finishing off this slide, so you may want to improve your procedures, and that's actually just touching on what Jo raised with David's comments. You may realise that as you're recording your inventory items, that there's certain bits of information that you know are out there but have not been captured. So you may think, okay, next time somebody gives something in, we want to capture A, B, and C about this item. It may be that you decide that as somebody gives in their kit or a piece of equipment, that you want a photograph of that person, thinking about how you might want to display it in the future, that it'd be really nice to actually humanise it and keep a photograph. So you may want to think about how you collect and how that might impact on your procedures. Oh, no, going the wrong way. Attracting funds. So, oh yes, Jo.
I'm sorry, interrupting again. Just a quick one though, which I think is really important from Emma about GDPR. And would you add any GDPR info on your inventory if you're dealing with photographs? Their collection isn't physical; it's mainly scanned images or photos.
I would, because it's just become such a hot topic. So if you've got the donor's details, if they've given in their photographs, then they would be your point of contact for your GDPR, and then you would just copyright law gets updated periodically, so then it's a question of when you want to use that item, checking the current copyright law and then going back to the donor to check that they are still the holder, and they would need to give you permission, the copyright permission and then a reproduction permission. So there's 2 types of permission you would like. So yes, I would record it in your inventory, but I've sort of assumed for these purposes that it might be the same as who your donor is. If it's separate, it may be an extra field that you want to add in at this inventory level. If you've got a lot of photographs that you know you're going to want to reproduce either in a display or in a publication, you may think that that is worthwhile recording at this stage. So yes, that would be a useful thing to record.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just because everybody's sort of going on the chat now, I would say that if people have got things that you think might help others, then if you want to share your details, then do that. Because I know Helen's just put something up about they've got a separate copyright register. But I am also mindful of time, so I'm not going to keep interrupting you, Fran.
Yeah, we're in the final few minutes. So yeah, I mean, if there are questions at the end, we'll stay on and do a bit of a Q&A at the end if there's still more to go through, by all means. So you may want to use your collection to attract funds. Obviously, all the funders are doing the COVID support at the moment, but at some point they will open up their project grants again. And quite often, any funder, if you particularly the classic ones are any of the lottery funders, they like you to know what you've got, but they don't necessarily want you to know everything about your collection, because that's what your project could be. Your project could be the cataloguing of it, it could be the creation of a display, it could be the updating of your website to create a fantastic online gallery. So you could wrap up a lot of the next lot of research, display, collection work in a lovely funded project. But by having your inventory, you can say to them how many objects you've got, the untapped potential, going back to that Museums Association quote we started with at the beginning, you can see the untapped potential in your collection, and this funder be the people to unlock that. So that's the sort of way that you could couch funding based on just having an inventory of your collection. And then you might want to share it. So whether you share it internally and so go back to your governing body and say, look, did you realise that we held this fantastic information? Or share it externally, put it on your website, put it on your Facebook page. There are all sorts of things you can do. Going back to creating partnerships, you may now realise that you've got material that is sympathetic to another organisation, either within your network, or it may chime in with something, if you've got things that link it to centenary, obviously you've got Olympics coming up next year, so big national things, you may want to work with a local organisation or a school, something like that, to create a partnership. You can only sort of see those once you've got your collection information at your fingertips. By creating your inventory, hopefully you'll have a clearer idea of where you've got gaps, or more importantly, where you've got duplicates of material that you may want to no longer hold, pass on to somebody else. Once you know what you've got and you can identify the gaps, then you can actively collect items to fill those gaps so that your collection becomes more comprehensive, if that's what you're aiming for. And sometimes it's easier to do that, particularly if you've got gaps within living memory, to go back and do it while people are still alive. Particularly, the examples I give, when people are looking around for First World War items now, 20, 30 years ago, it was quite easy to pick up First World War items. Now we've lost all the veterans and we've had the centenary. First World War items are becoming increasingly like hen's teeth, even the things that used to be quite common, like the Princess Mary gift tins and things that, there were thousands and thousands made of, are now really quite rare. And that happens with all collections. So if you can spot a gap that you think you could fill, that's a great project to do a bit of contemporary collecting. Oh, no, wrong way. Now you know what's in your collection, you can promote it within your own newsletters, on your website, local press. There was an interesting article on the radio the other day saying in these difficult and trying times, people like to look back and have a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of, looking into the recent past, because people find it very comforting. So that's where you see in the sort of the local papers, sort of, stories, on this day 100 years ago, on this day 50 years ago, do you remember this from your childhood, those sorts of things. And you'll be able to do that once you've got that collection information at your fingertips. And then finally, there's always another research project that can be done from within your collection. This is a great way to bring volunteers in. If you haven't already got volunteers working with your collection, being able to set up discrete research projects, great for you as the collection holder, but a great project and really rewarding for volunteers to be able to come in and do. So all of those things are eminently more possible and achievable once you've got that basic inventory of your collections. So what I would say is allow time to do it properly. It's worth the investment because it will pay dividends in the future, but do it little by little and do what is achievable for your organisation. Don't set up something that's massive because it becomes really hard to sustain. in the voice of a broken record, work together, work with people within your organisation. Even if you're doing the lion's share of the work yourself, do talk to other people about how you're doing it. Share your progress with those within your organisation, and it's an opportunity to promote it outside. Record your decisions and be consistent. You don't need to hear me say that again. But yes, keep a sheet of paper, you know, just make a note of why you've decided to do it the way you are. And yeah, don't stray from the path, be consistent. Do it well, do it once. The number of organisations that I work with collections, where a lot of the work is going back and unpicking collection descriptions, inventories, catalogues, because it was done quickly or done badly. I hate to think how many lottery projects have gone back and done that and unpicked it. A good catalogue is worth its weight, or good inventory is worth its weight in gold. And there we are, we've come to the end, almost dead on. So Jo, are there any final questions? Would anybody like to ask any final questions? So I take everybody off mute. I'll stop the share so we can all see each other. I'll just check that there wasn't. Oh yes, oh sorry, one final slide. After this presentation, we've recorded the session, so we'll be able to send you the recording should you wish to look at yourselves and the presentation again. I'll send you the slide deck as a PDF and a resource list of all the things that we've touched on. There will then be the absolutely obligatory evaluation link. It is the law, you must complete evaluation for all things. If you have any queries about anything that's cropped up in this session, I'm more than happy to speak to you outside of this session. That's my email address, do drop me a line. I know a few of you, but some of you we've just met today, so if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to ask. Or if you've got any questions that relate to sporting heritage as a network, you're more than welcome to contact us. So
Can I be cheeky as well?
Yes.
Can I say if anybody's got any COVID-19 questions as well, because obviously I was poorly when I did my session, and I know I've spoken to a few of you, but if anybody has any issues around COVID-19 or wants to know about funding or tools and toolkits that are out there, get in touch with me, or if you get in touch with Fran, she will forward you on to me, because I've got lots of resource lists and information and stuff's coming out daily that I'm recording as well. With regards to that.
Lovely. So are there any final questions that anybody would like to ask? Everybody's shaking their head.
No, not for me, thanks.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, lovely to meet everybody who's new. Lovely to see people who I already know. Pardon, Emma?
It was really, really good.
Oh, good. I'm sorry. It was quite a quick whip through. So if there is anything that anybody else wants to talk about, by all means do get in touch. And if you are starting from scratch, this hopefully once the funders open up their funding again, you know, there'll be support out there, and it's something that Sporting Heritage are really keen to support, this sort of listing of collections, because it can open so many doors for you as an organisation. So hopefully it will be useful.
If anyone's interested, we use AdLib to record our collection.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I've developed is probably 90% of our objects are related to a particular match or a season. You know, so it's a football from a particular match, or it's a team photograph from a season. So I've developed a spreadsheet that if you put the date and the type of match it is, it then populates a spreadsheet with all the details of that match.
Oh, that's
so
clever. Yes.
Things like the team that were playing, the competition, the players that were involved. So I could share a demo version of that if people want to look at it.
Yes, that would be really useful, because I'm sure that must be applicable to quite a few people.
Yeah, I mean, as well as having an inventory, you've probably got people there who've got spreadsheets and details of all the games that a cricket team's played or a football team's played. So use that information to help you populate your inventory. And I've done an example. The example I've done is actually the 1966 World Cup final. So put some around, make it Heart specific. I used an example, so I can share that spreadsheet around with some instructions to how it works.
That'd be lovely. If you send it on to me, then I'll send it on to the group, because I don't think I've shared everybody's details. So yes, if you'd be happy to send it on to me, that would be fantastic.
Because I'm doing a presentation for AdLib next week, so when I've done that, I'll share the presentation on the spreadsheet.
Yes, that'd be really helpful. If there's anything else, I'll probably leave it until, so what are we now, Thursday? I probably won't send out everything until early next week. So if there's anything anybody would like to share to the group, you could maybe send it to me by sort of close of play Monday or breakfast Tuesday, and then I'll send something out with all the other bits from my resources, sort of Tuesday lunchtime. So you'll see it drop into your inbox then.
And one sort of final thing, I think one of the key things is if you've got a project to start your inventory out with, because we started doing our inventory for when we were setting the museum up. So the initial objects we recorded were the ones that were candidates to go in the museum.
Mm.
So that then said that, it was looking at what would you call the ones that are displayable, and that gave us the candidates. So, for example, we had about, say, 50 objects for the early years. We whittled that down to 30.
Yes, you can prioritise how you do your inventory. It's completely up to you, and it like you say, it's always good to think about how you might use that information at the end. I've been attending some of the Collections Trust webinars, and they're very good at saying, don't do documentation for documentation's sake. Think about how you might want to use it at the end, because it will have an impact on the information you record and how you record it. So like you say, if you know that you've got a display coming up, or you know you've got a particular project, the flip side of that, just to be devil's advocate, is sometimes if you've got a collection that hasn't been catalogued or has been only got one word catalogues, some of those stories, you'll always discover stories about your collection that you didn't know were there. So by all means, prioritise and start with what you think might be your displayable objects, but don't stop there. Do everything. Do even, what you consider to be the driest, dullest, most boring, postcard, programme, leaflet, because you never know. In looking at it with different eyes, you may discover that it links to something else you've catalogued, or there's a story there that you suddenly think, oh yeah, actually, if I just put that into, Commonwealth War Graves or into Ancestry or into whatever sporting database, and you might discover something that you didn't know was there. So do everything, don't leave anything out. But yes, by all means, prioritise it as is most appropriate for your organisation, I think. Thank you, David. Any other comments?
Can I just say that I'm very envious of the backdrop to David's, where he is, because it's...
Well, actually, I'm on furlough, so I've not been in Timecast for almost 4 months.
It's just...
So
it's really good. I think it even beats Jeff's. I'm sorry, Jeff.
But Jeff had the bird song. I was very envious of Jeff's bird song. Anyway, we digress. Right, so I'm going to draw the session to an end. Thank you so much for joining in today. This has been the first, apart from Joe's one, which I know she did one-to-ones with for the COVID support, this has been the first of a series of Sporting Heritage webinars. So the next one is the last Thursday in July and is looking at collections at risk. So if you feel that your collection may come under that heading, please join us for that. It will come out on the next Sporting Heritage newsletter. I think we've got about 16, 17 people signed up at the moment, but we can take more. And then there'll be one at the end of August, which I'm afraid I think is sold out, but there is a waiting list. So if you are interested, please join the waiting list and we'll work out whether we can run it again, which is all about practical approaches to oral history. And that will be the last Thursday in August, which hopefully if lockdown lifts, we may actually even be on holiday for, which would be fantastic. So we've got 3 coming up, and then obviously when we get into the autumn, we'll have the Sporting Heritage Conference. So there's a number of online digital things happening. So please keep an eye on the newsletter and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Fran. Bye, Fran.
Bye.
Is there a Facebook group?
For Sporting Heritage?
Yeah.
Yes, there is. Yes. Yeah. The logo that was on all my slides, which is sort of a little blue rectangle with gold saying Sporting Heritage, or if you go via the Sporting Heritage website, which is sportingheritage.org.uk, you'll be able to link to all their socials from there.
And it's a group page.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.